Okay, so we are actually really thinking about the end of chapter 1 of the Song of Songs, and what we have seen over the chapter, and we're going to see it also in the next few verses of chapter 2, which from the Jewish perspective is really, most people would believe that the first few verses of chapter 2 are really a continuation of chapter 1. In other words, the first unit we would divide not where the chapters divide, but we would divide the middle of chapter 2, as we will show. But in the first unit, we hear the woman who is very much in love, and the man is much more reluctant. In other words, he's interested in the relationship, that's clear, but he's not interested in committing to the extent that when she asks him, "Where are you?" he is not he doesn't give his location. Um, she gets him every now and then to praise her, but he is not. But he does so reluctantly. First, he praises her jewelry, then she praises her. Finally, he decides to praise her, so he praises her. When he praises her, um, she is, you see clearly, is trying to upgrade and intensify the relationship. And as we will read today, that we alluded to last week, when he says, you're beautiful, your eyes are beautiful, she responds to him in kind. Whatever he uses, the terms he uses for her, she puts right back at him. She says, no, you are beautiful, my beloved, pleasant. But then all of a sudden, she says, also our couch is leafy. The beams of our house are cedars. Our courtiers are cypresses. So right away, she is talking about a bed, a couch. They say couch, it's really a bed. She's talking about a house. It's like you take someone on a date, and you're not even ready. If you're not even sure if you're ready to formalize the relationship, and the other person is sitting on their phone ordering furniture from IKEA. It's like a little bit strange. One person is sort of much more anxious than the next, or much more uh, um, um, desiring the relationship than the other. And that's what we see here. So we're going to share the screen. And again, of course, we're going to read the verses both as a basic story of a relationship between man and woman. And then we're going to read it according to the traditional reading, which is the historic perspective in the relationship between God and the Jewish people. And then we're going to get to the Kabbalistic or Hasidic Kabbalistic interpretation, where this represents the relationship between God and the Jewish people. In other words, we want to know what is the ramification of this for our own soul and our own relationship with God, the creator of the universe. So here we go. So I'm reading the end of chapter 1. And like I said, what happens is in 12, as we said in the last few weeks, 12, 13, 14, she is really saying that she does not smell that great, but she's praising him. So he feels that she is not, because she says, I don't smell so good, my fragrance is not great. He wants to reinforce, so he has to counter that, and he says, behold, you are comely, my beloved, behold, you are comely, your eyes are like doves. We discussed this last week. She says to him, just like he told her, she says, really? Oh, really? Okay, behold, you are comely, my beloved, ye pleasant, also our couch is leafy, the beams of our houses are cedars, our courtiers are cypresses. Okay, so that's the introduction. And you see here again, what we're seeing here is that it's not just tit for tat. It's not just he says something, she responds, but she responds and she's asking for more, and she's elevating the discussion. Okay, so we want to look at the historic perspective. And what is the historic perspective? Where did we leave off from the historic perspective? So from the historic perspective, the theme on the table here is, again, when in verse 12, when she says, while the king was at his table, my spikenard gave forth its fragrance, which really could mean lost its fragrance. When I give something, I could lose it. So she says, we were at the king's table, and I lost my fragrance. And what do we say? We said that from the historic perspective, Rashi says, that quotes the Medrash, that's referring to Sinai. When the Jewish people are at Sinai, they're literally at the wedding table, and the Jewish people betray God, and they create the golden calf. Okay, what follows? What follows is the God forgiving the people. And where was the expression of that? We mentioned that earlier as well. We said that verse 13 alludes to it. God says, after the forgiveness, God says, okay, I want to dwell amongst the people. And therefore he tells the people, build for me a home. And the Jewish people build a home for God in the desert. And Rashi is going to tell us that verse 16 and 17, when she's talking about our couch or our bed is leafy, and when she talks about the beams of our houses are cedars, what is she talking about? A home. Because in the desert, there was a home, and that was the temple. And Rashi says it refers to the desert, to the temple in the desert, to the portable sanctuary they built in the desert, but it also alludes to, Rashi is going to say it also alludes to the temple that they built in Jerusalem. You will see from the Hasidic perspective, from the Kabbalistic perspective, this is not the case. We're referring exclusively to the temple in the desert and not to the temple in Jerusalem. And what we're going to try to do today is clarify the difference between the two, and explain the energy that was in the temple, in the sanctuary in the desert, and contrast that to the energy that was a sanctuary in the temple. And of course, this is not just philosophical, but we really want to think, what is the application for our life? And that's what we're going to do, hopefully, God willing, in good health. So here we go. So we're scrolling down to the bottom. Let's read the Rashi. We'll just look at the historic perspective. Behold, you are comely, my beloved, you ye pleasant. This is she telling him. The beauty is not mine, but yours. You are the comely one. Ye pleasant, for you overlooked my transgression and caused your Shekhinah, the divine presence, to rest in our midst. And this is the phrase of the descent of the fire. And all the people saw and shouted for joy. Rashi is evoking a verse that happens in the third book of the Torah. After the Jewish people construct the temple, they finished their construction. It's the first day they had 7 days of inauguration, and then comes the day that finally the divine presence dwells amongst the Jewish people. The fire descends, and that's the symbol, that's the sign that God dwells in the temple, and everybody is joyous. And that's Rashi says that's what we're referring to the pleasantness of God when He comes and dwells in the temple after the sin. Okay. Also, our couch is leafy. Through your pleasantness, behold, our couch is leafy with our sons and with our daughters. All of him gather to you here, as it is said, and the congregation gather to the entrance of the tent of meeting. Okay, so he's saying our couch is leafy. Our couch, leafy means that there's activity here, there's people gathering. He says that's the sons and daughters, all the Jewish people gathering to the home is the couch is leafy. Okay, now Rashi is very clear. The tabernacle is called a bed, as it is said, behold, the litter of Solomon, the bed of Solomon. This is from the Song of Songs. We're going to read it later, chapter 3. And the temple is called a bed, as it is said concerning Joash in Chronicles, in the bed chamber, which was in the house of the Lord, because the sanctuaries, are the source of Israel's fruitfulness and procreation. So in other words, why is the tabernacle called the bed? Rashi says, that's the source of the blessing and the fertility and the procreation of the Jewish people, and therefore it's called the bed. You'll see that Kabbalah gives you a different interpretation, but we'll get to that later. The beams of our houses are cedars, our courtiers are cypresses. This is the praise of the tabernacle, says Rashi. Then Rashi gets into the word rahitim. It's actually very interesting. There's some of the modern words, some words in Hebrew appear exclusively in the Song of Songs, nowhere else in the Bible. One example is this word rahitenu, which is rahitim. In modern Hebrew, rahit means furniture. It doesn't appear anywhere else in Scripture, but it comes from this verse. And Rashi, when he wants to prove the meaning of this word, he cannot evoke a verse in the Bible because there is no other verse in the Bible that has that with this word. But he does quote a verse from the Mishnah, which is of course post-biblical, and that's what Rashi quotes as proof source. So the beams of our courtiers, the rehitenu. I do not know if this is a term referring to boards or a term referring to bars, but I do know that also in the language of the Mishnah, we learned the rehitim of a person's house testify against him. So Rashi says it may be the boards of the home, it may be the beams of the home. In modern Hebrew, like I said, it's furniture. Okay, so this is the story from the historic perspective that we're talking about. The woman, the Jewish people, praising God and saying, you're beautiful, and look what a beautiful bed we have. Look what beautiful home we have. What's the bed? What's the home? The home is the relationship between God and the Jewish people that is expressed in the fact that God wants to dwell amongst them in the tabernacle. He says, make for me a tabernacle, and I will dwell amongst you. And of course, why the metaphor bed? So Rashi says, well, that's the source of the procreation. That's the source of the children. But from the Kabbalistic perspective, it's much more simple and straightforward than that. And that is, again, if the relationship between God and the Jewish people is a metaphor for is a liken to the relationship between man and woman. So where does the intimacy take place? The intimacy takes place in the bed, and the temple is where the unity of God and the Jewish people, that's the place that represents that unity. That's the bed. So now we discussed the simple meaning, and we discussed the historic perspective as well. Now I'm going to give you the Kabbalistic perspective. We may even do. This may not take up the full 20 minutes. If that's the case, we'll start the next section. So we'll go a little quicker today, but we'll see how this unfolds. So far, if any questions or comments, please share. Otherwise, we continue. Okay, so what is the Kabbalistic angle here? The Kabbalistic angle here is what we're going to focus on is the difference between the temple and the temple that the Jewish people built in the desert and the temple of Jerusalem. Why is this so important to us? So let's go back to the simple story. The simple story is the woman is talking about a home, right? She says, oh, what a beautiful home we have. Now, do they have a home at this point? If you read the simple story, they don't have a home at this point. She doesn't even know where he is. She's saying, where are you? Where do you have your lunch break? She doesn't respond. He responds. He says, oh, go look for me. They certainly didn't move in yet. And at this point, this is more of her aspiration. She's trying to say, oh, we can make a beautiful home together. Remember, it's poetry. Hebrew poetry, it's not clear. Past, present, and future is not so clear. So many parts in the song, we don't know if it happened or in her mind, she wants it to happen. So let's assume in the simple story, there was no relation. They're not in a home together. They are, however, according to most interpretations, they are going to marry. This relationship is going to be established through marriage. That's going to happen in the middle of the song. The second half of the song is the problems post-marriage, right? People think before you're married, you get married, you live happily ever after. Well, that's not true. You get married, and then the I don't want to say the challenges and opportunities of the relationship really begin. So the middle of the book is going to be the actual marriage. And the middle of the book, we're going to have references to the bed of Solomon, which Rashi alludes to. The middle of the book, we're going to have a reference to God says, I've come to my garden. And we're going to say that means God is coming to this world. God is coming to the temple. So there's going to be the bed of Solomon. So what bed is she talking about here? Here, it's not really a bed. Here, it's in her mind. In other words, here, they did not really establish the home yet. They're going to do that later in the song. So how does that apply to, if you want to believe that a home is a metaphor where God is the home is the place where God and the Jewish people come together as signified with the temple. So then the Kabbalah says, look, there's two temples. There's the temple that the Jewish people, there's the portable temple, we'll call it the Mishkan, the sanctuary that the Jewish people build for God in the desert. That's portable, that's temporary. That's like going camping where you have your tents. That's not an established home. In Jerusalem, King Solomon, hundreds of years later, is going to build a permanent home. Now, it's not just the material. It's not just one was portable, one was temporary, right? That's just a technicality. While you're on the road, you have to take an RV. You can't build a home. It's not just a technical response to the requirements of the time. It has a deep symbolism. When you say that the relationship, that the home for God in the temple was temporary and portable, what you mean is the relationship has not yet been fully established. The relationship has not been yet fully culminated, and therefore they don't have a permanent home. In other words, the structure the Jewish people build to house, to sort of quote unquote, to house God. But what we really mean is to symbolize the relationship between God and the Jewish people is not permanent. Why not? Because the relationship did not reach its ultimate. In the temple, however, we're going to read about the Solomon's bed. We're going to read about God coming to the garden. We're going to read about
this way, left.
I have no way to turn left.
Just listen to me.
So what's going to happen is we're going to talk about the actual building of a permanent structure of the temple, and therefore, but again, it's not just a permanent structure. It's not just the material that you use. It really represents that the bond between God and the Jewish people reaches the highest level. So that's the first thing we want to think about. The different, so the two stages of the temple in the desert, the temporary temple in the desert, the portable temple in the desert, and the house that they will be built to God in Jerusalem, those two structures represent two stages in the relationship with God and the Jewish people. So that's the premise. And now we want to unpack that idea. Now we want to think about what that really means. And we're, as the Kabbalah sometimes does, we get very tangible. We get very tangible. We want to look basically at the actual structure of the building and see how the structure represents two forms of a relationship. So this is all by way of introduction. Now we can start the class. Okay, so far so good. If nobody's asking you anything, that means that whatever I'm saying makes sense. So that's good. But feel free to come in and chime in and ask and question. Okay, so we want to now unpack the difference between the temple in the desert and the temple in the temple in Jerusalem, and it's actually alluded to in the verse. Everything you need to know about again, everything you need to know is alluded to in this verse. When she wants to talk about the home, what does she say? She says, "The beams of our houses are cedars." Cedars. Okay, if you know the book of Genesis, in the book of Genesis, when God tells the Jewish people to build a home for God, he says, what is the structure of the temple made of? The structure is made of beams, cedar beams, atzei shittim, of cedar beams. So what happens here is it's a clear reference that when she says our home, the beams of our home are cedar, she's talking about the desert. So the desert, in the desert, the structure was primarily made of beams. Contrast of beams of wood. Contrast that to the temple in Jerusalem. The temple in Jerusalem, there was no wood allowed. It was all stone. Go to the Western Wall, you see these tremendous stones. Nobody has any idea how they were able to move those stones with the technology that they had then, but they got it done. So it's all built of stone. There's a debate. There may have been some wood there, but the wood is being hidden beneath the stone. You could not see that. The Mishnah says you're not allowed to have any exposed stone, wood in the temple. The temple is a structure of stone. The desert, by contrast, is wood. What does this represent? So one more layer, one more additional, a few more details, and then we start unpacking the mystical meaning. If you look at the structure of the temple, of the tabernacle in the desert, the roof was, so the walls were made of wood, but the roof was made of curtains. And the curtains, okay, I think I'm going to have to step in because the noise is getting a little distracting, so I apologize. Take a break for about a few seconds. Sorry about that. Okay, so if you want to look at the structure of the desert, of the temple in the desert, the walls were made of beams of wood, but the roof was made of curtains. What were the curtains made of? The curtains were made of animal hide and wool. And wool is also an animal product. So the Kabbalists point out that if you think about the structure of the temple of the desert, the Mishkan, there was a hierarchy. What was the hierarchy? You had animal kingdom, that was the roof. The wall was the vegetation, things that grow, trees, and the earth, and the floor was made of simply the dust, the sand of the desert. And that's the inanimate, that's the lowest. The early Kabbalists divide the world into four categories of life. You have the lowest is the inanimate, minerals, the mineral kingdom. Then you have the things that grow, the vegetable kingdom. And then you have the animal kingdom, and then above is the human being. That's the four categories. But the temple is the three categories, and there's a hierarchy. Top is the animal, then the walls are the tree. The walls are the trees and a vegetable kingdom, and then the earth is the ground and inanimate. And so you have a hierarchy. Temple, hierarchy here. There's no animal product. There's no um, products that grow. All you have is the stone is the inanimate. Now, what does that represent? So here comes the paradox. Here comes the mystical interpretation. But before we go there, we have to talk about what these three kingdoms represent within the human soul, because everything in the world is reflected within the human soul. So the Kabbalists explain that within the human soul, we also have the hierarchy. We also have this hierarchy of the temple. We have the animal kingdom, we have the vegetable kingdom, and we have the mineral kingdom. What do I mean? So let's start with the highest. Let's start with the animal kingdom. What is the animal within the human being? So the animal within the human being, if you're an animal lover or if you have a pet, you may like this. The animal within the human being is the highest part of the human being. It's human intelligence. Human intelligence is the animal kingdom. How so? By the way, in Hebrew, the animal kingdom, the animal is called chaya. Chaya means literally comes from the word life. The animal represents life. In some sense, animals have more life than the human beings. Maybe not domesticated animals, but animals of prey. They are a walking energy that represent life. So within the human soul, the intelligence is life, is the animal. How so? So if you think about the animal, especially in contrast to the tree, the animal is mobile. The animal could roam. The animal can go great distances, as opposed to, of course, a mineral. The stone can't go anywhere by itself. And even the tree grows, but it grows in one place. It can't travel away. It can't go away from the place where it is rooted. And mystically speaking, this is the significance. The significance is that the intelligence within the human being, the intelligence is supposed to allow me to roam away. Away from what? Away from my own perspective, my own biases, my own limited perspective, right? So if I have a certain perspective and I want to grow intellectually, what do I need to do? I need to be able, the mind is objective. Objective means I'm free from the subjective perspective. I'm free from the perspective that says, this is how I see it. For example, I love chocolate. I am planted in the chocolate, as you will see when we get to the tree. What is the mind? The mind is the ability to say, there are things beyond yourself. There are things that you may see in a certain way, but that's not the truth. There is objective truth out there. Can you go and travel and see and find the objective truth? And that's why the mind can change. The mind, very easy to change your mind. Not very easy, relatively easy to change your mind. You can get a new perspective because you could travel. Let's compare that to the tree. What is the tree? The tree grows and it's beautiful and it gives shade, but it's planted in one place. That, says the Kabbalah, is the emotional makeup of man. So we have the intelligence and we have the emotion. And emotion is subjective. Subjective means it's planted within my experience. What do I love? I love, based on my nature, based on my inclination, this is what I love. I like it. This is who I am. Very hard to change. Now, my love may develop. When I was a kid, I liked candy. When I was a kid, I liked to play in the sandbox. When I was a kid, I liked toys that were not that valuable. When I grow older, the tree grows taller. So what happens? My love develops, my emotion develops. Now I say, you can't buy me off with a candy. Now I want something really valuable. You can't buy me a game that's worth $1. Now you have to buy me what do people drive? Now you have to buy me a Prius. Now what a Prius? No. Now you have to buy me a Tesla, right? So the difference between children and adults is just the price tag of the toys. That's all it is. So in other words, that represents you're not really, even though you're growing emotionally, but you're rooted within the person you are. Now, you could theoretically move a tree. You take some earth, you transplant it. It could be done, but it's very, very difficult. So again, you have the emotional makeup of man, which that is like the animal, in the sense, the ability, the freedom to roam beyond the subjective perspective. I think this is the case, and I'm not open to anything. I'm a tree. I'm emotionally planted within a perspective. The mind is supposed to teach me how to say, okay, I feel this way. I feel chocolate is good, but maybe the science says that too much chocolate is bad. Okay, so I'm going beyond, I'm traveling away from myself. I'm not rooted in one place. By the way, if you're talking to someone and they are rooted in one place, even if they're putting forth intellectual arguments, most likely that they're emotionally invested. So that's what plants them in a place. What plants people in a place is that they're emotionally invested. Okay, now let's go back to the inanimate. What's the inanimate within the human being? Then the human being, inanimate is action. Why? Inanimate means it has no life. So I could do an action without any energy. Let's say I don't like you. Impossible. But let's say, no, I'm kidding. Let's say I don't like you. I could still perform an act of kindness for you. Why? Because the action is just inanimate. It's just an action. It doesn't have to have intelligence invested. It doesn't have to have emotion invested. So the action of the human being has the least life within the human being, meaning it has the least personality. So again, just to summarize, the three categories the Kabbalists find within the natural world, the animal kingdom, the vegetable kingdom, and the inanimate kingdom correspond within the person to the three categories within the human being. You have the intelligence of the person, you have the emotion of the person, and then you have the action of the person. That's the person. Okay. Now let's look at the temple in Jerusalem. The temple in the desert. Temple in the desert is a very organized place. We have a temple, and the temple represents sort of a reflection of the human being. And you have a hierarchy. You have first, the top is the roof. Roof is the animal kingdom. You have intelligence, and then you have emotion, which is the walls, which are made of beams, and then you have the earth, which is made of action. This is a reflection of the human soul, but the Kabbalists will also tell you it's a reflection of the spiritual worlds, because you know that there are four spiritual worlds. We're not going to count the fourth one right now. That's an expression of God. We'll count the lower three worlds, the worlds of Bria, Yetzira, Asiya, creation, formation, action being the lowest. These three worlds correspond to the three ideas of intelligence, emotion, and action. Meaning to say, spiritually speaking, in the world of the highest of the three worlds, in the world of creation, in the world of Bria, in the world of creation, there is tremendous amount of intelligence and awareness of God available. When you go to one world lower, that's the world of emotion. The angels and the creations of that world feel intense emotion to God. And then you get to our world. What is our world? There's no emotion. There's no spiritual connection to God. The awareness of God is not available. You don't naturally love God. What you have is you have a place of action, a place where you see God's action. Nature is God's action. And we're called upon to do good deeds. So without getting into every detail here, the hierarchy within the temple of the desert represents the hierarchy within the human soul, which reflects the hierarchy within the spiritual worlds. This is a big Kabbalistic idea. We can elaborate upon it. Hopefully, after somebody will have a question, and that will allow us to elaborate upon this point. Okay, this is all wonderful. This represents, so it's all good, fine. So that's why we say how beautiful the walls of our home is made of cedar, referring to, look what a beautiful structure we have. We have the roof, which is intelligent, which is emotion. We have the walls, which is intelligence. Roof, which is intelligence, walls, which are emotion, and that motivates the floor, which is action. And when you say we build a temple for God, we're also building a temple for God in our life. And in our life, our relationship with God has all three dimensions, has our understanding of God, our emotional connection to God, and action. We do the right thing. We do good in this world. Everything is fine. Everything is beautiful. The Kabbalists should be very happy. The problem is not the problem. Yet, when we come to the temple in Jerusalem, we say, you know what? We don't want the hierarchy. There's no intelligence. There's no emotion. There are only stones. There are only the world of inanimate, which is very strange, because all of a sudden we said within the human soul, the stone is the lowest in the hierarchy. Only action? What kind of a relationship is only action? This is very strange. It looks like we're going down, not up. It looks like we're not developing in our relationship with God. And to the contrary, we're stepping back. We're getting rid of the intelligence. We're getting rid of the emotion. And all we have is the action. So how could a temple in Jerusalem be considered to be the permanent temple and the permanent house of God, even more than the temporary house of God that we built in the desert, which seems to actually reflect the hierarchy of all the great levels and intellectual and emotional maturity in the relationship with God. So this is a big problem. This is an issue we have to deal with. And the Kabbalists deal with it. Go ahead. Take a question or two. Go ahead, Vicky.
Yeah, I'm just thinking that because when we built a temple, we kind of getting ready to dwell in this physical world where the manifestation of the human being, you know about human being by the actions. You don't know what he's thinking about, you don't know emotions. So this is actually represents how we can act in this world. So the temple kind of flows.
I hear you, but if I had to counter argue, I would say, look, we also have action in the tabernacle. Tabernacle, you have the roof, you have the walls, and you have the floor. And the floor is important for some rituals. There's some rituals that the Torah says you have to take the earth that's in the floor of the temple, right? So the earth of the desert is part of the temple and represents action. So I would say, what is better? Intelligence, emotion, and action, or action?
In this world, in this world, I would think action, because that's how we know about the human. That's how human being positions himself or herself.
I agree, and therefore the desert temple also had action, but why exclusively action? I'm giving you a hard time only because this is a big Kabbalistic idea, and we have to really understand how strange it is before we can explain how it makes sense and how sweet it is. But on the contrary, if I had to make an argument, I would put up the argument and say, if I can have intelligence, emotion, and action in my relationship, or I say, no, I don't like that. Let's just do action. In other words, I take out the garbage. I do what you want from me. You do things for me. I do things for you. But we're not on the same page intellectually, and we're not on the same page emotionally. How is this an advancement? How is this getting us anywhere? So this is the question. My job here is to make the question. If I go off the phone now, you shouldn't be able to sleep because this question is so troubling. But hopefully we'll be able to clarify and explain of why we are advancing, and the true Kabbalistic idea of the importance of the stone in the temple. And again, how come we're not there yet? In the beginning of the relationship, when we're dating, we're looking for the model of the temple, but ultimately we get to the model of the temple of Jerusalem, the portable temple. Eventually we get to the model of the temple. Go ahead, Bob.
Na'aseh v'nishma. It's always the action that supersedes the listening or the integral. I mean, I think our whole reason for being on this earth is to further God's design by deed, by action, by mitzvah. So to me, that always is the primary force.
Okay, you know what? Because both Bob and Vicky are disagreeing with me, I'm going to concede.
Isn't the main purpose of our being here is to elevate the physical?
Wonderful, but doesn't the temple also have action? What's better, intelligence, emotion, and action?
But it's focusing on the main purpose.
Okay. So you're saying it's not being no distractions. Distractions. Okay, so you're telling me that, and Bob is saying the same thing, and Vicky's saying that, look, we have to focus on the action because in this world, the purpose of creation is action. I agree with you. I'm just going to hopefully add a little bit. Okay, so I'm not disagreeing with you. I just want to add a little bit, because otherwise you say we have to add something. The Talmud says, "Ein bet hamedrash belo chidush." Any study hall has to have a novelty. If you come to the study hall and you only hear what you already know, then you probably should have gone on to another Zoom call, right? But a study hall, if it's a proper study hall, you have to add something new. It doesn't have to be the full hour, but something new you have to walk away with. Okay, so let me give a little bit of introduction again till we get to the answer. There goes the plan to learn the next section today. Also, that's going to have to wait for next week. There's a big debate in Judaism, and the big debate, of course, is what Bob alludes to: what's greater, action or study? And some people said study is greater. Some people say action is greater. And everybody knows the conclusion. They made a vote, and they had decided that. Ready for this one? Action is greater. Study is greater because it leads to action. That's a very Jewish answer. We can't answer straight. We can't say that action is better. We say study is better because it leads to action. So what that means is that in the beginning of the relationship, you need to have study, but the purpose of study is to ultimately lead to action. The ultimate purpose is action. Let me try to explain very simply. You have a relationship, and what's the relationship? The relationship with another human being or with God. The relationship is based on the three levels. We understand each other. we feel connected emotionally, and we could be on the same page, right? If you live in Australia and I live here and there's no action, we can't go out for dinner together, it's going to be a difficult relationship. You have to be able to connect in all three levels. And that's a healthy relationship. But however, and that's the beginning, however, that's not the goal. Because ultimately, Judaism will teach and the Kabbalah will explain that ultimately, in the relationship, more than anything else, after the bond has been created through the levels connecting on the intellectual level and the emotional level, and then the action level, after the bond has been created, that's wonderful. But there has to be something that goes beyond that. And what goes beyond that, that is the question of commitment. And commitment is, I'm here for you, not for me. And that's the core of the relationship. So I pushed back before. I said, look, the temple has action, the tabernacle has action, and the temple in Jerusalem has action, but it's not the same action. The temple in the desert is action motivated by intelligence and emotion. I understand. I see the world the same way as you do. I feel emotionally connected. So therefore, we're both going to do the action because we're both on the same page, right? I understand something. I feel it. So let's do it. Let's say we both understand and we both feel connected when we go volunteer. Okay. So we're connect on all three levels. And the action is because I feel connected to you and because I am emotionally connected, because I'm intellectually, I'm on the same page as you. And I feel connected with you, therefore, I'm going to go do something for you. Is that commitment? No, it's not commitment. It's an expression of the love. It's an expression of the idea. The temple says, one second, could we get to a place where at this point, in this moment of this relationship, I don't see the world the same way you do. In fact, I don't even feel connected. In fact, I feel the opposite of what you feel. You want to go skiing and I want to go to the beach. You want cold, I want hot, right? I don't feel connected and I don't feel, and my perspective is different than you. I think what you're doing is not what I want to do. In other words, intellectually and emotionally. Yet a relationship has an element of commitment. Commitment is I put myself aside, I'm here for you. That is a totally different action. That's not an action that expresses myself. That's an action that expresses commitment. Now, with the relationship to God, it's even more so because God is infinite, right? Your spouse is not infinite. Maybe the spark is infinite, but this is true in human relationships because this is true in the relationship with God. We are supposed to have a relationship with God. And therefore, in the beginning, we say, we're so happy. We built a temple for God in the desert and it's all made of cedar. Cedar is beautiful. Cedar is emotionally connected. Cedar represents the world of emotion. We feel close to God. We understand the greatness of God. And we're even willing to do something for God because of our understanding and because of our love. It's wonderful, so inspiring. You got all three. But we say that's the beginning of the relationship. That's when you're dating. You don't have the essence yet. The essence of God you can never get through understanding or through emotion or through action motivated by understanding of an emotion. Why? Because God is infinite. If God is infinite, our capacity to understand him is limited. Our capacity to feel him is limited. We will never understand or feel the infinite. The only way we can connect to the infinite is by devotion. And devotion is the action specifically without the moment of, without feeling the love and understanding what God wants of us. So this is very deep. What's the deepest place where you connect to your significant other? What's the deepest place? To a child, to a friend, to a spouse, to a grandparent, doesn't matter. What's the deepest place? So one place is when we connect, we're reading a book together, we share an idea, and we both understand the world the same way. Beautiful moment of connection. There's another beautiful moment of connection. We love each other. Beautiful moment of connection. Then there's the action. I'm doing something because as a result of the love. Beautiful moment of connection. The Kabbalah will say that's all wonderful. And that's the first step, but that's not the ultimate step. The ultimate step, and these are the relationships that are going to last. These are the relationships that are going to last. When I'm capable of doing something for you, when I don't want to do it, and I don't understand why you want it, right? This is just a joke. I hope this is not misogynist or sexist. Okay, I shouldn't say it. I won't say it. Men don't understand why women like flowers. You know that, right? You know that, right? Women like flowers. Men don't understand. Maybe buy jewelry, it lasts. Flowers don't last. So how come men buy flowers for women? So, or how come women like flowers? So the woman could answer their own answer. The man's answer is, which is probably not true, but we'll say it anyway. Women like flowers because the men don't like it. In other words, could you show that you're doing something because you don't understand why this is valuable and you're doing it anyway? That's commitment, right? If I buy my wife a gift, I say, you know what? It's your birthday. I'm going to buy you something. What am I going to buy you? I'm going to buy you a vacuum cleaner, right? Then she's going to say, it's not a gift. You're buying it for yourself. That's what you want, right? That's not a gift. The gift is, could you buy something that you don't understand why it's valuable? That's a gift, right? So there's two types of action, and that's the big idea here. There's two types of action. There's action in the temple, and there's action in the desert, and there's action in the temple in the desert, and there's action in the temple of Jerusalem. But it's not the same action. Why? One action is an action which is a result and motivated by the mind and the heart. It's wonderful. It's a nice thing. You need to have that in the beginning of the relationship. But then the temple, the relationship will survive if you're capable of having the temple of Jerusalem, which is action that is not motivated by the mind or the heart. You're doing it not for yourself, not because it makes sense for you. You're doing it because you're devoted to the other person. And certainly with the relationship with God, it's true because God is infinite. And therefore, to relate to God, our capacity to understand is limited. The only way we connect to the essence of God is the devotion. So in the desert, there's no connection to the essence of God. That's why the house was still temporary. The structure was still temporary. When we get to the home in Jerusalem, you want to build a permanent home to God, you need to have devotion. And the same thing is true in human relationship, even human relationships, even though the other person is not infinite, but it's the same idea. As long as they're not transcending the self, if it's all about what I understand, what I feel, what I do based on my feelings, then it's wonderful, but it's limited. It's really self-expression. Where could you have a relationship, devotion? Could you do action? Could you build a structure of action? Yes, even when you're not in the mood, even when there is no emotion, even when there's no intelligence, that is the permanent home for God, and that is the secret to a permanent relationship. Tomorrow morning, don't worry. Tomorrow morning, the emotion will return. It's like a fire. We'll talk about the fire. It goes up and goes down. It's wonderful. We're not saying you don't need emotion. To the contrary, we're saying you do need emotion. And therefore, first, you have the temple in Jerusalem, temple in the desert. You have to have intelligence. You have to have emotion. You have to have action motivated by the intelligence and the emotion. But ultimately, you want the permanent home. Permanent home is the temple. Could you do something even when you don't feel? Can you do something even when you don't share the perspective? What is that? That's devotion. That's commitment. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the story in short. A lot more to say. Take a few questions. And I'm having a great time, as always. The journey continues next week. I'll be very honest. When we started the series on the Kabbalah, the Song of Songs, I didn't realize how much I'm going to enjoy it. But this is actually probably the highlight of my week. So I thank you for joining and participating. Go ahead, Vicky.
Thank you. Actually, you said it. You actually answered my question, but I just want to make sure that that's the case. On the giving of the Torah, we said we shall do and we will hear. Is it related to this concept? Because initial impulse was we will do, so we will commit, and then we will hear. So, but we still needed to go through that process of.
So you are right. You are right, and Bob is right. At the temple, we understood we will do, we will hear, because action is more important. What I'm trying to say is we understood that innately at the desert, where we understood that innately at Sinai. And that's why we said we will do and we will hear. What I'm trying to say is, but it took us hundreds of years to practice what we said at Sinai. You see what I'm saying? We understood innately that the goal is to do first. But we weren't able to get there because you can't start a relationship with devotion. Right? Imagine I tell you, okay, you're going to date somebody, just find someone who you could be devoted to. That's not a relationship. You have to have an emotional connection. You have to have an intellectual connection. You have to do things together. Then once the relationship has been established, and once you have the emotional, intellectual, and action connection, then you could say, could we grow and introduce the concept of devotion? But you can't start with devotion. I mean, you could, but it's not really a relationship. So I would argue that we definitely did understand this at Sinai. And therefore at Sinai, we said we will do and then we will hear, meaning first we'll do, then we'll understand. We understood the superiority of action. But in reality, were we able to create a home? No. First, we have to build a home that is a relationship that reflects the hierarchy within the human being and within the universe. There's intelligence, there's emotion, and that intelligence and emotion motivates action. Then we get to the temple, and the temple represents, you get to the actual wedding, the actual bond, the true bond. What is the true bond? Only stone. Where's the trees? Weren't the trees beautiful? Yeah, there are trees, but they're hidden. Remember, I alluded to it earlier. I said, there's some trees in the temple, but they're hidden because it's beneath you're not allowed to see. It's not allowed to be exposed. Meaning to say, yes, of course, sometimes you don't see the tree. Sometimes in the relationship, you're not feeling the love. But then the question is, could you build a structure of stone? And if you could, that's devotion. That's commitment. That you can't do in the beginning. You can't date someone and say, I want to marry you because I want to be committed to you. It doesn't work that way. It's not a relationship. But once you establish a marriage, and once you establish a relationship, and once we connect on all these levels, to say that the goal of the relationship is to connect on multiple levels, including action, that's not the ultimate. The ultimate bond is the devotion. If I can do something not because of me, but because of you, I escaped myself, I connected to you, and ultimately, counterintuitively, that's the true joy. Because ultimately, what we really want is transcendence. So I think in my relationship, I want you because of what you do for me. And that's true to a degree. Part of myself wants self-expression. We have a conflicting energies in our soul. We have animal soul and godly soul. In simple English, we want both self-expression and we want transcendence. We want both. We're a complicated species, right? So we think that the more we take care of ourselves and the more the relationship focuses on what we need, the happier we are. It's not fully true because that we're part of ourself. What really wants in a relationship is transcendence. On the other hand, we also need self-actualization. We need both. But the point here is you need both, and that's why the model of both temples, of the desert first and the temple in Jerusalem later, is the healthy model.
Yeah, that's a beautiful idea. So from God's perspective, we were not ready. That's why we needed a temporary dwelling.
From our perspective, it takes time. It takes time. It's like, could you really be devoted to somebody when you're dating them? No. Even when your first year of marriage, no. You have to build. You have to establish the relationship. Ultimately, it takes roots. And then, God forbid, if there's a crisis, I'm devoted to you. It doesn't have to be a crisis. I'm saying at some point, well, there'll be plenty of crises in the relationship. We'll get to that later. We're just in the beginning. We're just in the beginning of the book. We got another 8 chapters. There are plenty of crises to analyze and develop and grow from.
So, Rabbi, in this growth potential to Jerusalem, aren't we slipping back? We're in the Gula, where we're kind of exiled. We don't have the temple anymore. Explain how this all works out, jives.
Okay, so I would say like this. I would say that really, okay, you're asking me to do something that is a little hard because we really have to take the bird's eye view of the whole book. But I'll give with 60 seconds. I'll make the argument that in the exile, we have more of the temple than in the temple. In other words, if you want to ask historically, where had the people had commitment to God in a way that was super rational and in a way where they didn't feel the love to God necessarily, but they displayed commitment to God even more than the temple was during the exile. So again, the temple means this is the meta. We are at the point when Solomon builds the temple, he says, this is what we can reach right now. Did they reach it fully? No. When did we actually, ironically, when did we really reach it? In the exile. But that is for later in the book, because later in the book, we discover that the marriage, the temple, Solomon builds his temple, the marriage is just the beginning. And ultimately, there's plenty of crises after the marriage, and it's possible, certainly from the Hasidic perspective, that we actually get to the deepest elements of the relationship when you feel the crisis, when you feel the alienation, when you feel the separation, and you overcome that. So in simple English, the exile is the crisis of the marriage, and when the crisis of the marriage, ironically, you can actually build the stones of the marriage even more when the marriage is going smoothly. So I think you're onto something, that the real commitment to God, we're going to discover the real commitment to God happens not in the marriage, not at the wedding, right? At the wedding, wonderful, we're going to create this. What happens at a wedding? You come to the wedding and they tell you, do you commit? we don't say it in a Jewish wedding, but you get the point. The point is that you're going to commit in a time of crisis. And you say, of course, that's what the covenant of marriage is. Covenant of marriage is not when we're in love, not when we have the honeymoon, but the covenant of marriage is that I'm always going to be there for you. Okay? But now, do you feel that at the wedding? Of course not. At the wedding, you're still in love. Hopefully not blind love, hopefully just regular love. But you don't really know if this is the case. You don't really know if you're going to be there for the other person in a time of crisis. That's what the wedding is. So think of the temple as the wedding. We build a temple and we say, you know what? We're ready to be there for someone else, even if we're not in the mood, even if we don't feel connected. Wonderful. Not easy for you to say at the wedding. Then comes the exile. Exile says there's a crisis in the marriage. Could you live up to what you committed to in the temple? And the answer for us historically has been a resounding yes.
Beautiful response. Thank you, Rabbi. It's just ironic to me that it kind of is the bedstone of what Chabad is all about, and yet Chabad doesn't chant Song of Songs, which is to me a interesting irony.
Well, unfortunately, we're not Sephardic, so we don't chant it. But I said you may or may not have been here the other week, a few weeks ago. But I said that I discovered from hearing from my late great uncle, he was saying stories of when his father, when the previous Rebbe came to the United States in 1940, and his father at that point, at that time, was living in Vermont and then moved to New York. And then he would go to the Catskills to spread Judaism throughout the week and sell, bring mezuzahs and tefillin to the Jewish farmers in the Catskills. And then he would come every Friday, would come back to the previous Rebbe in 770, and he would give her reports to give the previous Rebbe some joy in his life. He was suffering terribly at the time. And the previous Rebbe loved to hear the report that my great-grandfather, Avram Popak, would bring to him. But however, my great uncle said this in passing, that when my great-grandfather would come to the previous Rebbe, he would have to wait Friday afternoon. Even before he would go home, he would come straight from the Catskills to 770. But he would have to wait. He wasn't always allowed in. Why? Because the previous Rebbe was busy. What was he busy with? Well, he was busy saying Song of Songs. So I heard that. I was very happy.
Terrific.
Have a wonderful day, everybody, and a wonderful Shabbos. And we should meet each other in good health. And thank you again, because I'm enjoying this. Thank you.
Shabbat Shalom, Rabbi. Thank you.
Thank you. Shabbat Shalom.